it's Katie, Flower Mama. I'm so excited to teach you how to make wreaths, 3 different styles of wreaths. First, we're going to be doing lavender, and then we'll make dried flower wreaths and evergreen wreaths. To get started on our wreaths, first I wanted to show you the different wreath forms you can use. So we've got a lot of options here. There's this wire form. It's really a lot more sturdy. So these are willow branches. You could also make them with grapevines when you do the pruning in the winter here or early spring when the vines are malleable, and you could weave yourself a wreath form if you like the natural look. There's also Oasis rustic wire. This is something I use a lot. I use it in making flower crowns. It's just wire that has this wrap around it, and it's very flexible, and so I wound together a couple of pieces to make this form. And this is what we'll be using to make our dried flower wreaths. We could use it for the lavender, but I've decided it's best to use the wire form for the lavender today. And you can find these online. These are both, I left the tags on so you could see Oasis rustic wire, and this is Oasis bind wire. You can buy them in tan or dark brown as well. I chose green because it is a little bit more natural in that it'll blend in with our flower material. Now this is a 14-inch wreath form. You can find these at most craft stores. I happened to get this one at the dollar store. And now this is a bit too thick for what we really need it to be. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut off this extra wire that's around the very edge there. So I've got these wire cutters, which is important in wreath work. You wanna make sure you've got wire cutters, and I'm just gonna go ahead and cut this edge off. And now we have a lot more workable form. And you'll see there's a side of the form that's kind of concave, and then there's a side of the form that is a little bit hilled up over here. And we're gonna work with the concave side, placing our product on here. Now I like this bind wire because it's very soft. It's easier on your hands to work with, and it's easier on the material that you're wrapping rather than it being just straight wire. So I'm gonna go ahead, and a good length of measure is your wingspan, your 2 arm lengths. I'm gonna go ahead and cut right there. And this can be cut with the snippers, but it's still better to use your wire cutters, otherwise you'll dull your snippers faster. And you're gonna need more of this, so we'll just set this aside. Now this lavender, we're working with it fresh right now. It's a lot easier to wind the lavender around your wreath and secure it when it's fresh than when it's dry. When it's dry, it's pretty brittle. And so as you're pulling it tight, pieces can break a lot easier. This is local lavender, and it's just about at the end of its bloom cycle. You can see it still looks nice for our purposes, but this is gonna dry really nicely. So ultimately we're making our lavender wreaths to be dried lavender wreaths. And this looks more along the lines of almost dried than it does fresh, but that's okay because we're gonna be enjoying our lavender wreaths dried. And so what you'll need are 5 hardy bunches of lavender. And this is a good size bunch that we picked up. So we've got our lavender, got our wreath form, set the wire cutters aside here. I always start by taking out a bunch, and I'm just gonna cut it to have workable size pieces. I'm just gonna take my bunch and do that. And now I have stems that are a bit more workable in size. I've got my wire in my hand, my wreath is set in front of me, and I'm just gonna gather a bundle of lavender, just a small little bundle, anywhere from like 5 to 10 stems. like that. And I'm just gonna set this right on the middle portion. And with my wire and kind of my one hand, I form a tail, is what I like to call it. It's just this little piece of wire that kind of bends back on itself. And we're gonna place that going the same direction as the stems, the little tail. And I'm holding that tail while I take this wire and I wrap it around. And I'm gonna give it a couple wraps like that. So that's our starting. So I'm not even tying any knots. I've just got this tail to start and I'm gonna go start wrapping. And so I'll gather a few more bundles to put on here to thicken it up. We really want our lavender wreaths to be thick because all of these pieces are gonna dry and lose a little bit of their volume. So I'm taking some of these pieces and overlapping them. And then these little tails, it's nice to have your clippers handy because we'll be snipping these little tails as they get long and kind of in the way. And so now the goal is to just work around the wreath. And you want to think of filling in the edge of the wreath, the middle of the wreath, and the inside of the wreath. So you'll see as I lay my bundles of lavender, hi little bee, I'm positioning some of these bundles splayed out onto the outside. And then I'm gonna take another little bundle and I'm gonna position them more on the inside. And I'll wrap this before I add the next one, just one wrap. And then I'm gonna take my other little bundle and I'm gonna splay that more on the inside of the wreath form. And if you think in terms of a fan or like the palm of your hand working down, as such, that's what's going to give you a really full looking wreath. And now for this entire wreath, we're working stem side down for the whole wreath. And the goal is to always cover up your most recent work. Now you can see I'm kind of at the end of my bind wire that I had. So I'm gonna go ahead and get ready for a new wire. First by giving myself some space, clipping tails of stems. I'm just gonna take this and wrap it around here. I'm gonna find a good spot to wrap it around, maybe just around this edge a couple of times. You don't really need any knots. You just secure it. Got some stems in there. And cut yourself another piece of string. It's good to work in smaller size pieces like this because if you worked in any longer of a pieces, there would just be too much wire to constantly be pulling through your wreath. And again, I'm keeping the wire in my hand just like we were starting in the beginning to continue making our wreath, grabbing another cluster of lavender, securing that with my thumb. The tail is pointing down just like the stems, and I wrap the bind wire around a couple of times. You see I'm still keeping the fan shape in mind and putting some lavender bundles pointed towards the inside. And so it's literally every time you go around, you want to position some of your lavender bundles on the outside, on the inside, or the middle and the inside. As you're nearing the end of your wreath, it's going to be really helpful to actually have your stems pretty short because as you see layering on here, these stems are going to start bumping into your starting point. And really the goal as we finish is to be tucking the stems underneath, but we don't want to worry about that until we get there. So for now, we just want to keep the stems a little bit shorter so that they don't bump into where we started our wreath. Now the last and final step is to put a backing, a wire backing on your wreath to hang it. So once you've determined which is the top and which is the bottom, all right, this is gonna be the top and this is gonna be the bottom. So we lay this flat down. And this is paddle wire. It's a lot sturdier than the Oasis bind wire we were using to wrap. This is actually the wire we're going to use to wrap our evergreen wreaths when we get to that video. But this is going to be our backing. We're going to go ahead and make our tails like we did earlier. And the goal is to just loop it through the wire frame itself. So to kind of position this little tail underneath some of the frames, and you might even need to make an extra little hook to catch it once it comes up. There, keep it there and pull that through. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. And if you can find a section on your wireframe where there's the cross section of wire, that's kind of the best to use, but otherwise this works fine. And if you happen to get underneath your bind wire wrapping of lavender, that's fine too. We just want to secure it underneath. So then we're going to pull it to where it's almost kind of even on both sides and tight enough where this backing follows the shape of the wreath form. If you pull it too tight, you can see then the backing just goes straight across, and this is going to be visible when you hang it. So you don't want to pull it too tight. You want some slack and like just kind of hold it up to here. Make a loop on both sides so that it doesn't really go anywhere. And then this wire I just take and I wrap around and around and around, and this reinforces the backing, just making it a little extra stable. And now if you want it to dry, I mean, you could hang it fresh for a little bit because fresh lavender is super special. But if it's hanging while it's drying, these are going to end up drooping. So if you want it to dry in the shape that you made it, you want to lay it flat for a couple of days out of direct sunlight in a cool, dark location. It'll dry pretty fast. So this is a dried one that I had assembled fresh like you just saw. And now it's dried, ready to hang. You can see it gets a much more deep purple color to it when it dries. That's pretty much it for the lavender wreaths. My only other suggestion is about where to hang them. So because your lavender will dry and be a wreath like this, you don't necessarily want to hang it on a door that's going to be swinging open and shut a lot, because this is dry, brittle lavender and it will drop its pieces and it will shed if it's constantly being, tossed on a door. My suggestion is to hang this on a wall in your home and enjoy it. These will be good for a year or more. I can guarantee a year with dried flowers, but then after that, the color does start to fade a little bit. But otherwise, this is truly a treasure to enjoy year round. Now this is all compost, or it could be used for chicken bedding. It's something I really like to do with leftover lavender is put it in the chicken coop. One, it smells amazing, and two, I think it helps with mites and other pests. A lot of pests do not like lavender. You can see there's lavender from last time I made wreaths and put some in there, and so I just like to sprinkle this. Here you go, chicken. Lavender.